Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. So today I'm so excited because I'm going to be reviewing Waterfalling by H.A. Pruitt. So let's get into this. So first of all, I had surgery on October 8th. It is October 18th, so it's been 10 days since my surgery. And I was finishing up whatever book I read before this one. It's been so long I can't remember. Everything's kind of gone crazy and blurred together. But I knew, when I was leading up to my surgery, I wanted to finish that book because I wanted to read H.A. Pruitt's third book in the Anathalion series. So I've read Anathalion, Earthquaking, and Water Falling now. So I've read the first three books. I have the other two, so I'll put them here as cards. So I knew that her books are like YA portal fantasy, similar to Chronicles of Narnia, and they have a lot of spiritual truths in them and spiritual applications and lessons. So I knew with the stress of the surgery that I wanted to be reading this book when I was going through my surgery and recovery. So surprisingly, I brought it to the hospital with me. I thought I would have be bored and have plenty of time to read. I slept the whole time, most of the time, other than getting up, walking around a little bit when I could get up and walk around. I did no reading at all. But when I got home, I was a lot of the time sitting on the couch recovering over the last 8 days or so, because I was in the hospital for 3 days. So it's been a week at home. And I actually sat down and I had a lot of time to read. So that's kind of the background. I knew it was the perfect time to read Waterfalling during my recovery from the surgery, and I was totally right, so it was really fun. So the first part of the book was somewhat slow, but the first part kind of reminded me of, I think it's part of the myth of the Odyssey, where Odysseus and his men get caught up in some island or something, and they don't realize how long they're there. And I know Percy Jackson kind of did something similar with the modern day version of that, where they were in some sort of club. And the idea of the legend or story or myth, whatever you want to call it, is the characters like Odysseus and stuff get caught up in the place, and the place, I think that's a dog outside. Anyways, it mixes your mind up and confuses you and gets you caught up in the place itself and what's going on there, and it makes you forget how long you've been there, and it makes you forget what you're trying to do and what your goal is and where you're your home or what you're trying to do. And it was kind of similar to that, where the characters, I'm not going to spoil things for the first two books, but essentially they find themselves in a particular place, and the place itself was super creative. The descriptions were fantastic in this book, and I feel each book, her writing style is getting, you can see the progression. Most authors, you can see that with the progression of our writing and how it grows as the years go by. And that's true for hers too. But the descriptions were so vivid. The place was so beautiful. It was very creative. I won't spoil it for you, but the title kind of says it all. And it's so, so cool. But the interesting thing about the place was that it gave me a weird feeling of something's not right here, and not knowing what's true, what's real, and if you can trust what's going on, and a particular character in this was really fascinating. It did create a lot of instances shortly after that, where you had the main character, the main POV character, Kendall, had a lot of internal thought process to try to find out what was real, what's not. And so that part was a little slow. But the latter half, especially when they got to this certain town called Spader, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but Spater is the town. From that point forward, it was so addicting. I have been sitting down binge reading this book for the last 3 days, I think, from that point forward, because that town has another instance where it's weird, and you don't know what to trust, and you don't know what's going on with this town, and there seems to be weird things happening, and you just kind of want to keep reading to find out what happens. And the characters themselves keep getting into one problem after another that kind of all revolves around this weird town. The town itself is super creative, and I've said this before, I think, about her previous books, Anathalion and Earthquaking, and now Waterfalling, and the world of Anathalion itself is so creative and unique. It just makes you just feel a kid going on an adventure. And that's the other thing too, is I'm not much for YA, and I don't read a lot of books with teenagers in them because that's just not my thing, and it has never really, it takes a very special and unique book to like get me into teenagers these days, and this is one of them that does. Like I said, it got a little slow, but for the most part it was really good. Really good and fast paced, like faster, like the ending, from the middle, I went basically when they get to Spader, it like the pace was like super fast at that point. The ending had several different twists and things that like twisted events that I didn't see coming, and there were several things that like it got more intense than what I was expecting from this book and this series and the tone that she set, which is very much YA. And so bad things happen, but you don't expect a certain level of them, and I'm not saying it's like bad or graphic or violent or anything like that, but it was just like way more intense than what I was expecting, so it took me by a pleasant surprise. And there was a lot of things that happened, and there was still a lot of spiritual truths in this, that especially one of them is one of those spiritual truths that's kind of hard for me to accept, which means it's a really good one. And I did mark the quotes, so we're going to read some of those. You really think so? I mean, you really think he knew everything our necklaces were going to tell us and about everything? She wanted to wait for his answer, but another thought entered her mind. Why didn't he tell us? You know, if he knew everything, why didn't he just tell us so we'd be ready and know what to do and not go to Arl and not get caught by those rock eyes and all the other stuff we didn't have to do? So it's one of those things where it's like just relatable. I actually did take so after I would put the sticky note, the transparent sticky note, so I could still read the quote, I would take a picture of it with my phone and then make a note on my phone over the picture. So I said, it's so true. I wish God would tell us the plan so we would know, but he doesn't. Sometimes he lets us try to figure it out for ourselves. So that's one. The first one. Her mind felt so overwhelmed by seemingly answerless questions that she wanted to cry, shout for an explanation, and storm away all at once, but instead turned her attention to the warping water above in an attempt to forget all of it. Even though she wanted to understand everything, it was easier to push it all aside, pretend it wasn't really happening, and just focus on the movement of the huge undulating wave. And I said, relatable. It's easier to focus on the present and not deal with difficult or scary things. That's me right now, trying not to think about the surgery in 2 days. So I have a really bad habit of doing that when something is looming, like the surgery, because I was reading this part before the surgery, where it's like it was easier to just focus on the present moment and not think about all the complicated problems that just feel so overwhelming to try to think about. Ken, Ella thoughtfully breathed, this place is pushing us to be at odds with one another, isn't it? And our makers, Kendall added, and Ella nodded in agreement. We really ought to leave then. Yeah, Kendall slowly agreed. She still very much wanted to remain in the midst of Carmen's warm hospitality, but knew it would cause separation from her maker and her friends. And I said, it's difficult to hear God over our thoughts and Satan's lies. Also, sometimes it's easy to want to stay in our comfort zone or where things are simple, but sometimes that isn't what's good for us. Is what I said on that. Essentially taking you guys through and then my next one was toward the end. I don't think this is going to spoil anything. Maker's plan, which she had been doubting existed at all, felt wrong to her and Ella because they had been wanting their own pleasure, family, and not the quest the Makers had planned. The Maker's plan, which had seemed to contain such horrible, hateful, harmful things, really hadn't brought all those bad things. Her own and people's insistence on doing what they wanted had. The Maker's plan had only seemed bad, but truthfully it was her own and redacted names to avoid spoilers, pleasures that were wrong. All their choices to do what they wanted instead of what the Makers wanted were the cause of the bad things. The Makers had planned a way to get rid of evil, but she and everyone else were only making more of it by believing they were entitled to their own pleasure. And I said, that is such a difficult lesson for me to truly learn. And another additional comment is like the big theme about this is like your plan versus the Maker's plan versus basically like God's plan, which is something that I struggle with so much because it's not that like I intentionally think that my ways or like plans are better, but essentially it's kind of like that where it's like we all have these things or concepts of like, I think it would be better if, this happened, or I think that my life, like, I think it would be good if this happened in my life, but that may not be God's idea of what he wants for me. And it's like trying to, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but essentially I've always, because I've never struggled with, especially like as an adult, I've never really struggled with the question of whether God can do something. My question has always been whether he will. And that's where my own internal like problem has been, and what this really was hard for me to face at the ending, that lesson at the end of the book that really hit hard and hit close to home, is because that essentially is me subconsciously or consciously, either one, basically thinking that, well, God's will is not going to be as good as what I could come up with for myself and what I want for my life. And what if God's will isn't what I want for myself, and having to surrender my plans and my thoughts and ideas versus God's. And that is something I really, really, really wrestle with. And that's the main theme of this book. And I feel like it's not fully the lesson hit, but I feel like it's the next book is going to even like hit it, like bring it to light even more, and like have that full awakening of the lesson. So I'm really looking forward to the next book. And honestly, the characters kind of ended up in a cliffhanger-y place as well, because like a lot of stuff was happening in the plot line. And like I said, the pace really picked up to a fast-paced thing after they got to the town Spader and all the stuff going on. The ending was a whirlwind. The part that I read tonight was like so intense, I had to keep reading until I finished. It was like the last 30 to 40 pages really was like so much was going on. I would say a little bit more than that too, but the last like 30 to 40 pages especially was like super intense with a lot going on, and the characters are like in this cliffhanger kind of situation where you don't know what's going to happen next. And then the epilogue went to these two other characters that we're still kind of in the dark as readers, not understanding what's going on. So a lot of the dialogue didn't make sense, but we don't have all of the answers yet. And so I feel like that's going to keep getting more as we get more answers throughout the rest of the series. I feel like that's going to shed a light on some of those epilogue-y moments like that, like this one that was in the epilogue. So overall, I really did enjoy this book. I would say probably 4 stars. It was a 4-star read for me. The ending was really super good. I found it really intense. Again, the big overall lesson and theme of this book is like truth and like your plan versus God's plan. I really loved the whole we don't know what's real and getting caught up in this place that kind of distracts you from your goal, that kind of vibe at the beginning. I like the characters and the place that they're in, and I feel like the space, like the places in this book, like the locations and the setting was so creative and unique. It really drew me in and made this a really fun and exciting read, especially at me going through a surgery and recovering from it. This was like the perfect book for me for this time of my life and like what had happened. So I really enjoyed it. 4-star reads. Waterfalling by H.A. Pruitt. It's part of the Anathalion series. I'll have links to all 3 books in the description below, so please go check her out. She's an amazing author. This is an amazing book series, and again, it's similar to Chronicles of Narnia, and it's YA. It's a portal fantasy. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, then you would probably like Anathalion, and if you ever wanted anything new, then Anathalion is waiting. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked this video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more writing and reading videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. In the meantime, if you liked my review of Waterfalling, then please go check out my review of Anathalion. That was book 1 in her series, Anathalion, and kind of started this whole journey of me reading her books and her series and everything. So please go check it out. You don't want to miss it.